Alexa, play that Amazon Ads podcast.
Which one would you like to hear?
The best one.
Okay, now playing that Amazon Ads podcast.
These gentlemen are completely changing the game.
After listening to that Amazon Ads podcast, my ads are finally profitable.
I also heard they're pretty cute.
All right, welcome back to that Amazon Ads podcast. Andrew, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, Steven. Just over here thinking about, Amazon ads and stuff. So, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. Hey, what do you think about that intro music opener that we have?
Oh, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I love the intro to this. It really sets it up, gives a real representation of what we bring to the table.
Yeah, I like it. We had a couple of talented voice actors, including my friend Jarrett. Shout out Jarrett. You and also your wife. Comes on at the very end of that. I think you had her. I think you sent me when we were editing it. You sent me like 5 minutes worth of her just saying they're so cute, like and over and over again.
In my defense, that wasn't my choice. Okay, she was very particular about what she was going to send for that. It wasn't like, I was sitting there telling her, no, that wasn't good. Redo it. She was very critical of herself. So she wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to make sure that was absolutely perfect.
It was tough. There were so many good takes. I finally picked one that I thought really worked with everything. But yeah, that was Andrew's wife, who comes on at the end of the intro, in case if anyone was wondering a fun fact. But yeah, I think we decided on a name. The first episode, we didn't know what we were going to call it. We ended up going with, I think, that Amazon Ads podcast. Still subject to change, but I think it's kind of a fun name. Reminds me of like that 70s show. So let's see. We had the Bezos Bros.
Yeah, I didn't really like that one.
Yeah, I thought that one was good.
I wasn't a huge fan of it. Bezos isn't even the CEO anymore.
Oh, true. But he is in my heart. That Bomb Ecom podcast.
Okay.
It's kind of fun. Like bomb.com, but Bomb Ecom.
Bomb.
Oh, dude, this one you came up with. The Fixed Bid.
Or the Final Bid. I think I threw that one in there too.
Yeah, it makes me think of an Irish tavern or something.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, that one was good.
Although I followed up on that one with the Dynamic Down Only podcast. We had Clickbait. We had Above the Fold. We had Always Be Optimizing. Optimize Me, Cap'n. Anyways, needless to say, those did not. None of those made the cut. I think we're going with. Neither did Ad Daddy. That one did not make the cut.
We were really on that one.
Yeah,
we really liked that one last time.
Sounded really good for a moment, but yes, I believe we are now that Amazon Ads podcast. So, with that said, to kick off episode 2, Andrew and I were thinking about which topics were the most important to cover early on in the show versus later on in the show. And we think that keyword bidding needs to be a massive priority in terms of the order of content, because it'll make it significantly easier for us in future episodes to, rather than just, cryptically referring to, oh yeah, well, our bidding system, blah, 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 blah. And like, we'll teach you guys that later. We're going to get that out the gate. This is probably going to be like a 5-part series because there's a lot to cover with bidding. And, we mentioned on the first episode that Andrew and I do bids manually. So we're going to talk about all of the different criteria, exactly the bid specifications that we utilize and what we do. And then hopefully after we get into some more of the meat of Amazon optimizing, we can just reference these episodes. So, Andrew, I think there was an interesting LinkedIn survey that trended this last week from the wonderful Elizabeth Green, who has agreed to come on as a guest at some point in the future to this episode. But Andrew, why don't you tell us about that survey that she ran on LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. This one was a hot survey. Got about 440 votes, I think, the last I checked. And basically the post was just trying to poll and survey the industry of what's most important in Amazon advertising, whether it be keyword selection or bidding. And I think we were both pretty surprised to see such a high concentration of people saying that keyword selection was more important to Amazon ads than bidding. And that's kind of a shock. 88% of people said keyword selection was the most important factor in finding success with Amazon ads. And I think we both firmly disagree with that, and that keyword selection is a very small element in the total picture of Amazon ads. And I think I put a comment in there that basically said, imagine that you got access to an account that you've never worked on before, and you could only pull one lever within that account to make an impact on performance. What do you think you would choose? Would you choose to add more new keywords, or would it be to be able to make bid changes across the existing keywords, which are probably pretty relevant already because you've done the vetting and harvesting from different campaigns? So in my opinion, the one thing that's going to make the biggest impact is not picking out new keywords. It's making changes to the bids, setting bids to more optimal targets that are, trying to meet a target. And usually that's what clients want when they're coming to you. They've left someone or they're doing it themselves, and, their ads aren't performing. They're not sure why. Usually it has something to do with bids and less to do with keyword selection.
Yeah. And I think it was kind of funny because we had just recorded that first episode in which one of our core of the 5 principles that we thought, what are the 5 most important principles that we would hope anybody coming to Amazon ads would just focus on and master. And one of those was that bidding covers a multitude of sins. That was like a core principle, one of our foundational, we could only pick 5, and that was one of it, was get the bidding right, because it can save you so much. It does so much of the work for you. And that was my response actually to that survey, or what was it called? A poll. So for that poll, that was my comment. I was just like, bidding covers a multitude of sins. And I like your comment, Andrew, too, that if you took an account and you could only change either the keywords or the bids, not both, which one's more likely to turn the ship around? And I would agree with you, bidding, because I also mentioned on the last episode that the reason why I can guarantee new clients that my services will more than pay for themselves within the first 30 days or their money back is solely because of the keyword bidding strategies that we've put together, which we're going to walk you guys through. But yeah, you've got auto campaigns, you've got all types of keywords, broad match, phrase match, whatever. If you can just bid properly on them, you're instantly going to see a massive return. And that's the biggest problem that I usually see, is that these bids have been automated. The automations either were not set up right, or their formulas aren't totally the best. So yeah, we are going to talk about that. And this is a bit more of an overview episode, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of an introduction to how we think through these things. And then we'll have multiple follow-up episodes where we actually break it down one by one, go through a bunch of different criterias, and yeah, we will see how it goes. But Andrew, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about keyword selection versus bidding, and kind of just your thoughts on what's more important and why it's more important to Amazon PPC success.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as keyword selection versus bidding goes, I think, like we said, obviously we think bidding is more important. And I definitely feel like keyword selection really hinges on the bidding, because keyword selection is just like one element of the equation, whereas bidding covers a multitude of elements, right? The keyword selection basically just determines on which queries you're trying to display your ads, whereas bidding can impact a lot larger multitude of elements, like which placements you win within that search, whether it's top of search or rest of search or, in the featured product section. Your bids are going to determine at which placement you're winning, and which ones are most important are obviously those top of search placements. And your bids are going to help you win those placements. So keyword selection just determines which query you're going to show up on. Your bids are determining which placement, which is, in my opinion, more valuable. It also determines, how much you're spending with each click. So determining, meeting your target ACOS is largely determined and predicated on what your bids are set at, what you're able and willing to spend. And we'll go over some different formulas and stuff of how to calculate what exactly those bids should be set to in order to help you achieve your target ACOS for a particular keyword based on the conversion rates and how much you're generating per click. And then keyword selection ultimately doesn't really matter without bids. It really hinges on what your bids are set to. So you could pick all the perfect and right keywords and the most high volume relevant keywords to your product. But if your bids are too low, you're not going to get any impressions. Or if your bids are too high, you're going to spend way too much, way too fast on those keywords. So in our opinion, bidding plays a much larger role in dictating performance and what drives success on the platform and within certain campaigns. It's largely predicated on bidding and making sure you're setting those optimal bids, and not as much on keyword selection. We think that keyword selection is a result of a process of keyword harvesting, and your keyword selection should happen naturally over time. There is some manual input that we'll talk about and get into later, but it matters more when you're choosing high volume terms to go after. But ultimately, if we had to put them one-to-one, which one's more impactful and which one plays a larger role in driving strong performance, it's got to be bids.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a ton of high quality keywords, high traffic keywords, but they're competitive and the CPCs are crazy and your bids aren't right, you could literally bankrupt a business by spending too much on those and being not profitable. However, if you have, so point there being, if you have the best keywords but you don't have bidding, that could destroy you. But then other people might say, well, yeah, if you have terrible keywords in there, that's why we think keyword selection is so important. Because what if you have just the worst keywords in the world in your account? That's why we prioritize keyword selection over keyword bidding. But I think the counter argument would be, well, if you have the worst keywords in there, the formulas that we use should downbid those keywords to 2 cents at the very least. And usually when we do have a ton of, after we run our calculations, when we see a ton of 2 cent bids, I always double check those, and perhaps those are archive opportunities to get rid of those keywords. But yeah, I mean, your bidding is going to take care of that. It's going to naturally increase spend on everything that's relevant in your account and decrease spend on everything that's irrelevant. Your account could be fully auto campaigns, and these, as long as it's like segmented well and all that, the keyword bidding is going to create incredible performance for you. So all that to be said, let's actually talk about the 4 different criteria for making keyword bid changes, and then there's a 5th bonus criteria in there as well, which we'll talk about. So let's transition into that. That's a very epic whoosh transition sound. Before we actually talk about the criteria, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is the time frame you are using for your data selection. This is absolutely essential. Anybody who's a data scientist or a computer scientist knows the axiom, garbage in, garbage out. Basically just means it doesn't matter how advanced that process, the calculations are, everything like that. If the data coming into it is bad, you're going to have a bad output. And so the first thing is, and we'll probably have another episode where we talk more in depth on this, but you want to pick the right date range in your bulk file or however you're making these changes. You want to make sure you pick the data that most likely reflects the next time period. And on the last episode, Andrew and I gave an example of how basically we've never seen any automation software perform well with bid calculations on January 1st. because they're always looking at the last 30 days. And they're looking at the increased conversion rates of the holidays to inform their bidding in January. And that's just the largest mistake I've ever seen. You know, when I'm optimizing bids in January, I'm either, if I am going to use the previous days, the previous month's data, I'm certainly at least going to incorporate an anticipated conversion rate change. You know, look at the previous year, look at how conversion rates dropped from December to January, and add that as a variable in my bidding formulas. Or what I'll usually do is I'll use a shorter time frame. I'll just go off the last 7 days. So looking from December 25th to January 31st, and using that as my date range, because that period is more likely to be similar to the first 7 days of January compared to the first 25 days of December. You know, last 7 days of December are closer to the first 7 days of January compared to the first 25 days of December, if that makes sense. Same thing happens, you know, if let's say Prime Day is on July 1st, I don't know, let's just say it's on July 1st, and now it's July 10th, you don't want to use the last 30 days of data, because you're going to have a ton of spend from around Prime Day that's going to heavily influence that. So I would either pick the date range leading up to Prime Day or the date range immediately following Prime Day as your sample data for calculating your bids. So that's just the first thing that just needs to be clarified. And being able to manually select those timeframes is a big reason why we are advocates for manual bidding, because automated solutions that just go with a rolling 30-day period, we just don't think is the most effective.
Yeah. One other thing I would just add to that is I love this topic of picking the right date range. I think one thing that could be added is, what if you've made bid adjustments within the time frame that you're looking at?
Yes.
So let's say you pull the last 30 days, you make a bunch of bid changes, and it's 2 weeks later. Do you still want to pull that 30 days worth of data? Because then you're going to have 15 days from the previous bid adjustment period, and then the 15 days after you made those adjustments. I would be more inclined to just pull the 2 weeks following the bid changes, so I can see what the actual performance was after I made those bid changes. So that's another aspect of things that I think weighs into this conversation well.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And perhaps the best way to think of this is to pick your date range. Your start date should be the last date since there was any significant changes in the account up until yesterday or whatever's the most recent thing, assuming there were no massive changes within that time period. So you're getting relatively stable data. So the date since your start date, where it was like the first opportunity after a significant change, that could be after a period of seasonality, a period of discounts and deals on products. It could be after significant bid changes or campaign changes settings with your like dynamic up and down, or you're increasing for top of search. So that's going to be, you got to kind of just think critically, think for yourself about which time period makes the most sense, where the data within that time period is relatively stable and consistent and accurately reflects what the future performance will look like for the next week or however long you're planning on going until you make the next bid change. So excellent point there, Andrew. Okay, so let's dive into the 4 criteria for making bid changes. Andrew, what is the first one that we have? Well, actually, just walk us through all 4 of them. Like really quickly, just name them, and then we'll go in depth into each one.
Yeah, for sure. So the 4 main ones that we're often looking at to make bid changes fall into 4 different categories. So we have high spend and high ACOS targets. We have high spend non-converting targets. We have low spend, low visibility targets, and low ACOS, high confidence targets. So those are the 4 main criteria that we're going to be breaking down going forward here. Yeah,
and so essentially you can think of this even as 2 groups. The first 2 are essentially meant to decrease spend, and the last 2 are meant to increase spend, is kind of what we're going to do here. So the first 2, if it's high spend, high ACOS, which actually in my experience, you very rarely have anything that's high ACOS without high spend by definition of having a large cost. But yeah, so we're going to be reducing bids on anything with a high ACOS is the first one. We're going to be reducing bids on anything with a lot of spend that's not converting. And then the bottom two, we're going to be increasing spend on anything with low visibility. And then we're going to be increasing spend on anything with a low ACOS that, seems to be doing well, has a good amount of data confidence attached to it. And what I typically do is I'm usually doing I'll either run the first two equations or the bottom two equations, depending on the pacing of the account, depending on the sales. When sales are a little bit slow and the ACOS looks good, I'm going to run our bottom two formulas to increase that spend. And if pacing is hot, ACOS is running high, margins are tight, then I'm going to run the first two. And so I normally flip-flop back and forth between those two different, whether we're at a macro level doing increases or decreases of bids, depending on the pacing. And that's something that I've found is super effective at helping to achieve the spend goals, the ACOS goals, and the sales goals by just, picking and deciding which lever you want to pull, which I think is far more effective than having an automated solution that's going to always run all four constantly. And then it's difficult to kind of track, when you have that many changes going on, it's really difficult to troubleshoot if ACOS spikes, where did that come from or whatever. So yeah, Andrew, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that very first one with high ACOS keywords, ton of spend on them. What's basically that what we try to do there? Or actually, tell us what people try to do and then what we try to do.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is what, number one, most automations do, and number two, what most people do in order to get those bids dialed in, which is changing bids by a percentage. So they're either increasing or decreasing by a set percentage. A lot of times that's, between 10 and 20%. They're saying if a keyword has a high ACOS, then I want to decrease bids by 10%. And what they're trying to do is just ladder down to a point where their ACOS is lower, and ultimately, ideally, still getting visibility and driving impressions and clicks to their product pages. The biggest problem that I see with this is just the speed at which you're able to actually get to your optimal target bid. Because if you're going just 10%, stepping it down, when you could just go and snap your fingers and hit that optimal bid target based on a ratio of how that keyword is performing and what type of sales volume that keyword is actually driving with every individual click that you get, you're much more quickly able to optimize the account and optimize those bids on those keywords, as opposed to taking multiple iterations of slowly laddering it down in one bid optimization, one bulk sheet. You're able to set those bids accordingly based on the performance of that keyword. So that's typically what we see people doing, and ultimately I think it is inefficient.
I just thought of something, Andrew.
What's that?
So I ran a poll on LinkedIn 4 days ago. I only received 21 votes. I'm not as popular as Elizabeth Green. But I ran the poll. I said, how do you adjust your keyword bids? The first option was, I don't know, / third-party automation software. Which is
sure, we got some right there, right?
yeah. That was 10. That was actually only 10%. I was surprised it wasn't more. But 57% of respondents said they increase or decrease by X%. And then only 30% said the revenue per click model, which is what we ascribe to, which we're going to talk about in a second. But I just realized something. To Elizabeth Green's poll, where 88% of respondents said that keyword selection is more effective than keyword bidding, it's probably because 60% of them aren't bidding correctly. They're just doing increase, decrease by X%. But like I've seen this numerous times in an account, but you'll have some keyword with like 1,000% ACOS. And if your plan with that keyword bid is to just decrease it by 10% once a week until finally the ACOS comes down, it's going to take you several weeks to get to that point, and you're going to be burning through cash in the meantime. Whereas we're going to teach you guys exactly how to calculate the bid so that you hit that ACOS tomorrow, the target ACOS. And essentially what it is at a very high level. Again, we'll have another episode where we talk more in depth about this. We'll probably figure out how to do screen share on this thing, so for YouTube watchers, they can see have some formulas written out. But the revenue per click model at a very high level is essentially, if you're ACOS, if you think about it, it's just ad spend divided by ad sales, right? That's the formula. And if you're at say a 40% ACOS and your target's a 30% ACOS, we're going to have to either reduce our ad spend or increase our sales. If we're trying to do that at a bid level, then usually what we're going to be doing is trying to decrease our spend on certain keywords by adjusting our bids. And we're basically just what we're going to do is we're going to try to hit that ACOS at a click by click level. So if ACOS is spend over sales, we're going to figure out what our sales per click is and then set our cost per click to be 30% of that sales per click, is essentially all it is. So if your target is 30% ACOS and you see a keyword bid, you see a keyword with let's just say it has a 50-cent CPC and it has a 50% ACOS, then, and it doesn't matter, let's just say it has $50 of spend, $100 of sales, it has a 50-cent CPC, 50% ACOS. Your goal is to get this down to a 30% ACOS. All you have to do is reduce that CPC from 50 cents to 30 cents. And assuming conversion rates stay the same, they should, unless something's weird's happening with your products or whatever. Assuming those conversion rates stay the same, when you change that bid to 30 cents, you will have a 30% ACOS. And it's as simple as that. Well, actually, it's not quite as simple as that. There are a few other things that we have to factor in. We do have to factor in, do you have top of search increases for top of search? If you have a 100% increase multiplier for top of search placements, a 30-cent bid can still get you a 60 cent CPC, which in this case would yield a 60% ACOS. So we do have some formulas, which we'll show you later on, with how you can, first of all, calculate your top of search increase, like what's the most ideal to optimize for those placements, making sure that you're also hitting your ACOS, your target ACOS at the top of search, as well as on product pages and rest of search. So how to change those campaign settings, and then how to factor those settings into your keyword bids. And it's not quite as simple as like, oh, well, if my top of search increases 100%, I'm just going to reduce all my bids by 50%. That's not necessarily accurate either, because every individual keyword, the data points that you're looking on at, your spend and sales on that keyword, is an aggregate of all of the possible placements for that keyword. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look at, the click share at top of search as a percentage of your total clicks for that campaign, and then figure out that kind of ratio of your click share percentage of total, and then factor that into the keyword bids. So we know when we calculate the keyword bid, it's going to be setting the CPC to be a percentage of your target ACOS as a ratio of your revenue per click or your sales per click. And then we're also going to add in that top of search multiplier, adjust for that increase, adjust for the click share percentage. And then there's a couple other variables too that we'll talk about, sometimes increasing or decreasing with anticipated conversion rate changes. But yeah, I think that first formula, at least for me personally, that is kind of the golden formula, and we've worked a lot to tweak it and refine it to account for different campaign settings, whether you have dynamic up and down on, dynamic down only. But that is, massive to be able to take over an account, run one bulk file operation, and suddenly every keyword that was over the ACOS target is hitting the ACOS target within 24 hours is, I think, a pretty massive achievement that, unfortunately, a lot of these automation softwares don't use that. Some do use that. But a lot of these automation softwares, they're just going to increase or decrease by a certain percentage. And depending on the frequency with which they do that, one other issue with that, and sorry to belabor the point, but let's just say you're running these changes every week. You're trying to decrease those bids or whatever. Or actually, let's use a hyperbole. Let's say you're making these changes daily. You're gonna daily calculate these bid changes. If you're going in there daily and you're decreasing or increasing by X percentage amount, it could be that for the next week, this keyword was like a low volume keyword and it didn't get any additional clicks or traffic. And so the data for your time period didn't change. But every single day, the existing data said it was above target or below target or whatever. So even though the data didn't change over those next 7 days because it was a low traffic keyword, you've increased by X% 7 times or whatever, or decreased it by X% 7 times. Whereas with our formula where you're calculating it off the data, doesn't matter how many times you run it, you could run it hourly. If the data doesn't change, the bid's not going to constantly be increasing or decreasing by a certain percentage. It's going to be just recalculating as a ratio of that keyword's revenue per click. And so it doesn't matter the frequency. So that's one big benefit of doing the revenue per click model versus the increase decrease by X% model. Because if you increase the level of frequency of your bid changes, it doesn't really work with those percentages. So I know there's some counter arguments to that. This is a topic which we plan on hosting a debate on this podcast, having a proponent from either side come on. But this is certainly a heated one. But I think at least for this episode, Andrew, you and I feel extremely comfortable and confident with that bidding model that we've been using.
Absolutely. I think the proof is in the pudding. And you really laid that up just perfectly, man. I don't have anything to add to that segment of our bid changing criteria. That was perfect, spot on. That's definitely the model we stick by. We've seen excellent performance with that, and it just makes for really good working relationships with clients and stuff whenever you're able to systematically and formulaically hit targets that they need you to hit. And this is just one of those ways that we found to be able to do that.
Yeah. Now, I don't want this episode to go on crazy long, so let's try to fly through. We're going to come back to each of these things. We're just trying to lay the foundation for each of these kind of bidding manual algorithms. So, Andrew, why don't you talk to us pretty quickly about high spend, non-converting, what that means, what we do.
I'll talk about that one. I'll give a quick overview of it, but I don't want to steal your thunder because I know that you came up with a pretty sophisticated and smart formula for how to calculate these bids.
Are you calling me sophisticated and smart? Or are you?
Sometimes you are. Sometimes I don't know about it, man. But for the most part, I would say you're a pretty smart guy, I guess.
Oh, thanks, man.
You're welcome. But yeah, so high spend, non-converting. So these are just the targets where you're getting a lot of spend, but we're not seeing any conversions. Pretty straightforward. But the problem that we face with this is how do we know what the optimal bid for that keyword is? If we're spending a lot, we're getting a lot of traction. How do we calculate a bid for that? That isn't, just bidding, decreasing bids by X%, and basically trying to factor in like if this product were to convert in the next 10 clicks or 20 clicks, what would our ACOS on that keyword be? So we're getting a little bit more theoretical here with how we would calculate this based on a potential conversion happening on a keyword. So Steven, do you want to dig into this one a little bit more?
Yeah. So what we've been doing is we figured out a target cost per acquisition, which CPA, cost per acquisition, not super prominent metric in Amazon, but it is in all other kind of digital media marketing. The idea is essentially cost per order. So a lot of times we look at cost per click and all these things in ACOS, but we don't look at cost per order, which is what this would be looking at. So, based off of your average, revenue per order, your average sales price, your AOV, average order value, you're taking your total sales divided by your total orders to figure out, on average, how much revenue do you generate per order. So let's just say your average order value is $30 and you're targeting a 33% ACOS. What should your average cost per order be, Andrew?
$10.
Good job. And by the way, this is also going back to that first episode, like use math, like think up, try to think through things logically, to try to figure this out. But kind of like we just said with the revenue per click, your cost needs to be a certain percentage of your sales because that's what ACOS is. So you can figure that out on a cost per click basis, a click by click basis, or you can figure that out on an order by order basis. So we're going to figure out what our average order value is, $30. 33% of that is kind of our target cost. So you have a $10 cost per order, cost per acquisition, which means anything in your account with spend over $10 and not converting is something that's going to need to be optimized. And so that's something else I think is very important. I see a lot of people talk about high spend non-converters, but they haven't really, I don't see people advocating for how do you set the spend threshold. People will be very arbitrary. There's like, oh, if it spends over $20, we're going to reduce the bids. Or if it spends over $5, we're going to reduce bids. Like, let's think critically through it. Where does it become an issue? If something spends $9 and doesn't convert, is that an issue? If it converts on the next click, at a $10 total spend to get that $30 sale, that's right on target, So for those types of keywords, what we're going to do is we're going to, anything that has over $10 of spend, we're going to do something similar with that revenue per click model. But because there are no sales attached to this keyword yet, we're going to take the average order value and assume, if this keyword were to convert on the next X number of clicks, then what would the ACOS be, and how should we calculate our bids to make sure that we're on target if and when this keyword converts. And then another beauty here, just like a mathematical formula that we should be using is, how many clicks are you trying to calculate out towards? Well, we're going to do our average clicks to order ratio, which is basically just the inverse of conversion rates, right? Conversion rate is order divided by clicks. Flip that over, clicks divided by orders. That's on average how many clicks it takes to get an order. So, again, in a future episode, we'll talk more in depth about that first bidding system we did with how do you actually calculate that revenue per click model. In this one, we're going to build off that and we're going to say, okay, now we're going to take that revenue per click model, the same one as before, only there's no sales on this keyword. So we're going to assume the revenue per click is whatever the AOV is divided by the current number of clicks plus our average clicks to conversion ratio. So, if it converts in the next benchmark average, clicks to conversion ratio, then what would the revenue per click be? And the beauty of this is that as those clicks keep on coming and as that keyword keeps on not converting, the bids are going to naturally step down, scale down, scale down, scale down, scale down until you either get to 2 cents or until you get a conversion. And then when that conversion happens, boom, you'll be right on that target ACOS when it happens. So we're essentially looking forward and anticipating the conversion and adjusting bids. And with each incremental non-converting click, we're slowly scaling back that bid so that when it finally converts, we're right on the money. And then if it never converts, eventually, we'll pause it or archive it. We have other criteria for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this so much. One thing that just referring back to our last episode, we talked about thinking for yourself and taking a unique approach to every single account that you're working with. And a formula like this allows you to do that because let's say, I always see number one, people talking about click threshold, like at what click threshold are you looking at like for optimizations? What a lot of people say like, oh, if it doesn't get an order in 10 clicks, then I'm going to start downbidding it. Or, in this example, we're talking about the average order value. So if it spends up to $9, but I'm selling a $300 product, I have a lot more room to spend and hit a target ACOS than I would on a product that's $30. So having formulas like this definitely helps tailor that approach to every unique account and gives you the tools that you need in order to be able to make those calculations based on the specific account that you're working with, as opposed to taking, just arbitrary benchmark numbers that you hear from other people or on a podcast or things like that. So really love that. Yeah.
I mean, just to reiterate, think for yourself. Don't just pick an arbitrary number like, oh, if it's 10 clicks or this Amazon ads influencer said he uses anything with over 10 clicks, he's going to reduce the bids by 10% or something. Which again, if that's okay, I'm not going to get into it. This is going too long, but I could have gone off on a tangent with why that's bad. But
okay.
Point
Another
being, if you're an account, I've seen some accounts where especially like, yeah, there are some accounts that average a 2% conversion rate because it's just the nature of their business. If you're like, I've seen this with one client who is car parts, and they just had like 1 billion units of all these different types of things, and people are like clicking on their products to see if it fits their car, and if it doesn't fit their car, so they had like a 2% conversion rate, which is, 1 divided by 2% is 50. So 50 clicks to a conversion. So you shouldn't really start, destroying your bids until you get to 50 clicks, because now that keyword or target is underperforming your benchmark. So, all right, we got to move this along so that this episode doesn't become forever. But yeah, we will be coming back. So, Andrew, we got 2 last ones here. We have our low spend, low visibility, and then low ACOS keywords, but with good data confidence. Why don't you tell us about those 2 things, what they do, and how you optimize them?
Yeah, for sure. So just as we were talking about not to increase and decrease your bids by X percentage, we're going to throw in one scenario where we do take this approach to stair
Are we
step
hypocrites,
our bids
Andrew?
up. We're a little bit hypocritical, but not in the way, that most people are. This is like a specific reason why we want to use this increase by X percentage. So that would be on our low spend, low visibility keywords. So these are targets where you're not getting clicks and you're not getting spend. And the main reason why that always happens, you have a couple of reasons, but it could be relevancy. So your product isn't relevant to the target or the keyword or the search that you're trying to appear on. But most likely it has to do with your bids being too low. So if your bids are too low, you're going to get lower value impressions, lower value placements, not as likely to generate clicks. Whereas if you were to increase those bids on the low spend, low visibility keywords, you would be winning more valuable placements, likely getting more impressions, more opportunities for additional clicks, which would increase that spend. So this category falls into when things are pacing well, and you want to add on additional spend. You want to increase budgets, increase spend on a particular keyword, and try to drive more and more traffic to your detail pages. So we use this one when things are not getting clicks. We'll filter out for things that have no clicks or low clicks below our click threshold for whatever date range we're looking at. And in this example, we would, depending on how aggressive you want to get, you can set what that percentage multiplier is. But typically, we're increasing bids between 10 and 20% in order to generate more visibility on those keywords and get better placements and drive more traffic. So this example is stair-step strategy, where we're just increasing by a percentage point until we get to a level where we have enough data to actually make optimizations on those keywords. If you aren't getting clicks, there's no way for you to optimize those keywords. So we have to generate more data around those terms in relation to the product that's advertising on that particular query or that particular keyword. And once we have that data, then we can start layering in some of these other formulas, like the revenue per click. If we find out that our product doesn't convert as well on that term, we can start using those revenue per click formulas once we have the data. But if we're not getting any clicks, it's difficult to actually make any optimization on those. So this is one of those examples where we would be trying to increase spend and increase visibility on, different targets that we're trying to use.
Yeah, and the reason why we don't go with the revenue per click model on the low ACOS scenario is a lot of times your low ACOS keywords are going to be like, maybe if something got 1 click, 1 conversion, and let's just say the converted at like 20 cents and the sale was $20, your ACOS is going to be, is that 1%? Yeah, like a 1% ACOS, And if you calculate your revenue per click off of that, you're essentially assuming 100% conversion rate. So yeah, if that keyword converted with every single click, then yeah, you should go ahead and use the revenue per click model. But with those low click, low ACOS keywords, that revenue per click model is not going to hold up that well. So for those ones, that's where we'll anything with a low ACOS, we'll just slowly kind of increase those bids just to grow some visibility on those. But one other thing that's important to note, and the way in which Andrew and I run these bids is we got some help from some guy on the internet who can write out scripts for Excel, and we fine-tuned and tweaked all these formulas and kind of built a little bit of like a pseudo dashboard in Excel, and then we gave it to the guy and just had him script it all out for us and put in a few buttons. And so now all we have to do is we download a bulk file, we pick our date range, whether we're going to use last 7 days, last 14, last 30. Heck, you can take last 7 and then 7 days from 90 days ago and then combine them into one. I've never done that before, but you pick your data that you want, you throw it in the macro enabled Excel file, and then it's going to calculate your top of search placement, all this stuff that we're going to walk through the actual math for it. You have 4 different buttons for the 4 different formulas that we just talked about. You just click the ones that you want to run based off of your client's pacing and goals and all that, or if you don't have a client, it's your own account, your own account's pacings and goals. And we do have a bid ceiling and a bid floor kind of safety rails in there. So that's something else you always kind of want to keep in mind, because sometimes weird things can happen with the data that's going in. And so those are always kind of nice safety rails to, just put some bid caps on so that you're not accidentally bidding $20 on something. Final thing I'll say here, we do have one final 5th criteria, and I'm just going to throw this out as a teaser, but we talked about if something's low spend, low visibility, what do you do? Like if it only has like 1 or 2 clicks, but it has a sale on it, you could probably increase those bids by X%. We'll also in future episodes, we'll talk about what percent should you be increasing by too, and kind of give you some numbers there for how to think through, how to make the decision your own. Are you doing 5%? Are you doing 10%, 20%? So we'll talk about that. But again, I think that number too should be different every time. Are you increasing by 5% or 10%? That should be different depending on a number of factors, which we'll talk through, which is again why manager decisions are important and using math is important. But the 5th and final kind of criteria is, what do you do with items with only 1 to 2 clicks and no sales? Do you increase those bids for more visibility? But keep in mind, you could have hundreds of thousands, not hundreds and thousands, although it could be also hundreds and thousands of those that have 1 or 2 clicks and no sales, and they all add up. There's no single keyword or target that's an offending keyword that's high spend, no sales. But cumulatively across all of those keywords, you have it's not uncommon for me to see that like 20% of my account, if I download a targeting report for for a new account, and I just filter for everything with, let's just say, less than 5 clicks and no sales, that could constitute 10 to 20% of the entire account spend, which if there was no spend on any of that, that would instantly then reduce the client's ACOS by 10 to 20 percentage points. So it's pretty sizable. 10 to 20%, not percentage points, my bad. But yeah, that could, if you were to reduce that spend, you could have a big impact on lowering that ACOS without just pausing all those keywords, because some of them might convert, So we're going to talk about as well this kind of special criteria of how do you manage bids on those. We're going to talk through, just how to think through that and how to figure out what the optimal bid is for all of those keywords that basically have no data, and individually no single one is a big offender, but cumulatively they're bleeding your account and cutting into your margins. And so we'll help you guys out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I've seen the exact same thing. Had clients, with a lot of their spend, a big concentration of their spend going to 1 to 2 click keywords. A lot of that, could as potential reasons why that could be, thinking about things like search volume on those keywords. Maybe they just are keywords that don't get a whole lot of search volume. But having some sort of system to calculate what those bids should be across that selection of low spend, non-converting terms as a whole is going to be absolutely vital. So I'm excited to dig into that with you in future episodes.
Yeah, I certainly feel a little bit frustrated that we weren't able to go more in depth on a few of these, but that's why we're doing the show, and that's why I'm looking forward to future episodes. We've got quite a lineup on our topics brainstorming board, things we want to share with you guys. We're excited to start getting some guests on here, hearing some different points of view, hosting some debates on several topics.
Oh, the debates are going to be so much fun, man. I can't wait.
Yeah. And it's going to be a good show. So yeah, like we said, right now we want to lay the foundations. We feel strong convictions around the importance of keyword bidding. And if you can get that right, you're going to have a lot of kind of smooth sailing in your account. Keyword bidding covers a multitude of sins, but you have to do it right. So I think that's kind of why the polls have been going in different directions than what we think is optimal. So we're going to lay down these foundations for the next several episodes, and yeah, we'll talk to you guys next time. So thanks for listening to that Amazon Ads podcast. If you have any questions, you want to reach out, hit up either Stephen Knock on LinkedIn, Andrew Bailiff on LinkedIn, and we look forward to hearing from you guys. Talk to you later.